Woohoo. And we're off. Welcome, welcome everyone. We'll give you all a few minutes here to jump in and uh, we've got a big crowd today. So excited to have all these new and of course existing users here. So this is going to be great. Let me pull ahead and pull up some links here real quick so I have those ready for you guys when the time is right. But feel free to drop us a line in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, how you're doing, where you're from. This is going to be a pretty big session, so I imagine that the chat's going to explode here. We're going to have a hard time keeping up, but we'll do our best, won't we, Jane?
We will.
Oh, yeah, we'll do our best. Okay, looking good. Okay, so I'm seeing Christina from Ohio, Brian from Maryland. Oh, I'm seeing now there it goes. California, Los Angeles, Denver, Switzerland, Georgia. One thing I love about these sessions, Jane, is that we just get such a huge turnout from people all over the world.
Mm.
I've had people from Africa, I've had people from Australia, Europe, Asia, U.S. Obviously. I mean, just all over the place. So much fun.
I'm still waiting for Antarctica.
Antarctica.
I haven't crossed that bridge yet.
Haven't crossed that bridge yet. Maybe one of those days we'll get those scientists on Antarctica. Oh boy, yes, that would be great. We want to hit every point in the world, right? Everywhere, North Pole to South Pole, everywhere. Oh, good. Good. Well, excellent. I know we do have a lot of Scrivener users here. Give me a shout out if you're a Scrivener user. You know, love to hear that. Although we're not going to be talking much about Scrivener today, but still want to hear. We got our whole Scrivener community here, so this is great. I'm
I
so
use
excited.
Scrivener.
You
I
use
used it for,
Scrivener?
oh
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I used it for my
I know
second
that.
edition. I used it for the first edition. It's the only thing I will use to write a book. Um, Word
Perfect.
is not going
Yeah,
to cut
Word
it.
is terrible. Yeah, I hate saying that because Word has its function. It's good
Yeah.
at formatting some other things that it's pretty decent at. But for writing a book, I agree with you, Jane, 100%. Scrivener is just like it's just perfect. It has all the things and more in some cases
Yeah.
for what you need, and so you
Yeah.
get to pick and choose the tools that just work best for you. So I didn't know that. That's exciting. I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear
Yeah.
that. Sometimes it's hit and miss. Sometimes our guests have used it, and sometimes they haven't. So I'm excited to have you here. So she knows. She knows, guys. She knows where you're coming from. She gets it.
So someone just said Sunday said in the chat that there's Tom Sullivan from Antarctica. Is someone like pulling my leg? Do we really want
Yeah.
to Antarctica
Did you see that,
user?
Tom? I will look through the chat probably after the session and see. Yeah, don't pull our legs, people. If you're really from Antarctica, we want to know. Oh boy. Well, we'll give everyone just a couple more minutes to jump in before we get started. You know, that email is being sent out that the session has started, so we want to give everyone enough time to get in. We're just over 500 participants, so that's incredible. That's awesome. So we're about well, actually not quite halfway, but we're we're getting there. We're getting there. Looks good. You know what? Maybe while we're waiting, I had a question I could ask you guys, and I think I'll pull that up right now. Let's see if I actually have 10 questions. I have to choose one, the best one here. Um, ooh, where was that when I was just reading it? Okay, let's do this one. What's one piece of advice you wish someone had shared with you when you first started writing? So let's just go with that. Throw that out. I don't know, Jane. Do you have any thoughts on that question? What's the? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I wish someone had told me that no matter what the writing project is, break it up into tiny, tiny, tiny pieces,
Yes.
rather than just listing like a to-do item that says, write your book. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Oh
do
yeah.
it.
Yeah. Ironically, I got the same advice, but when I was in college in a math class, my calculus teacher, I was really struggling with calculus, and he said, "You know, Oliver, you just have to break it up into the smallest component, and then solve that component, and then move on and on and on." Now, as you can tell, I didn't pursue a degree in math or calculus or engineering, but that stuck with me, and I'm like that applies not just to math, that applies to even writing a book, and that's kind of how I've done it too. I break it into small pieces, and I love that about Scrivener too, because
It's
That's the key component is that you can break it up into chapters, scenes,
Yep.
and it's small components as you want. Really, it's pretty incredible. Excellent. Let's see what other people have saying. Uh, Rejections are an important part of the learning curve. Okay. You don't need anyone's permission or any bona fide to put your stuff out there. Okay, yeah, just put it out there. That's good. Heidi, don't wait for inspiration. Just start writing. Oh, I like that. That's a big one for me. I'm very much a kind of like a planner. So whether I'm feeling it or not, I try to write every day, and I just write, 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 write. And sometimes I get something great, and sometimes I get not so great stuff. But the key is I got to have it there. Keeps me going. Are any of these sticking out to you, Jane? Anything looking interesting here?
Well, Doug is, warming my heart with his suggestion to subscribe to Jane Friedman's newsletter.
Yes. Do it. You won't regret it. I agree. Yes, please do it. I'm a subscriber too, so subscribe away. Much to learn. Much to learn. Okay, let's see here. Looking good. Okay, well, you need a writing group. I know you have a Discord, right? I think I'm even part of your Discord
I
group.
do.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
little quieter than most, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like uh If Not Now, When, from
Mm-hmm.
Domini. I'm probably butchering that name, I'm sorry. Um, but there's never the right
Mm,
time.
yep.
That's how I express it. Then the
Oh
right
yeah.
time never arrives. So you have to, again, break it up into
Yep.
small pieces.
All pieces and get started. Yep. Yeah. There's never going to be a perfect moment. That's my wife would always get after me for that. She's like, you're waiting for some perfect moment in your life to get this done. And like, you just need to sit down and start doing it. I'm like, okay, I'll stop cleaning my desk and organizing all the little pieces and planning my world and outlining endlessly until it never goes anywhere. Eventually, you just have to say stop, start writing, go. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're about 4 minutes after the hour. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick, and then we will be right on our way. Thank you so much, everyone, so far for your participation. This has been great. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? I think we're looking good, right?
Mhm.
Excellent. Let me get before I get too far, I need some notes here. Can't see. Where'd they go? They disappeared on me. Hate when that happens. There they go. Oh, I minimized them. That's what happened. Okay. So off we go. So welcome everyone to our April 2025 Scrivener webinar series brought to you by the creative minds behind Scrivener and Scapple, Literature and Latte. I'm Oliver Evensen, your host for today, bringing you insights drawn from over 15 years of writing and Scrivener expertise. Whether you're a seasoned author or just beginning your writing journey, our webinars are crafted to meet you where you are. And today I'm thrilled to present the business of writing with our esteemed guest, Jane. Is it? I I don't know if I've been saying your name right. Friedman, right? Friedman?
That's right. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. Should have checked with you beforehand. She'll be sharing insights every writer should know to thrive in their career. Alex and I will be moderating this session, so if you run into any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to us in the Q&A. And I'm going to make that very clear. Please do it in the Q&A. If we see questions in the chat, we're going to try to redirect them to the Q&A because there's just so many people. The chat's going to be really hard to keep up with. So let's get rolling here. First off, quick overview of our schedule before we get started. I just want to walk you through it real quick. So what we'll do is we'll be kicking things off with a brief introduction to Jane, who brings a wealth of experience and insights to share, and then I'll hand it over the rest of the time to her for her presentation. Now, after Jane is done with her presentation, we'll finish with a short Q&A, and that'll give you a little bit of an opportunity to ask her any clarifying questions. So we'll go to that point. Here we go. So now that we're better acquainted, I'm really excited to introduce you to someone who truly sets the standard in world publishing and the world of publishing and author education. It's my privilege to welcome a speaker whose expertise and insights have changed the careers of countless writers. I'm excited to introduce you to Jane Friedman, and I know you'll find her experience and advice incredibly valuable. Now, Jane Friedman brings over 25 years of experience in the publishing industry, and her work has been instrumental in helping writers turn their passion into successful and sustainable careers. She's the author of The Business of Being a Writer, an essential resource for authors widely used in writing programs across the country. Excitingly, a new edition will be released in spring 2025. Now, Jane's contributions go far beyond her writing. She's worked with some of the most respected organizations in the industry, like the Authors Guild, Writer's Digest, and the Chicago Manual of Style. Her dedication to supporting the arts is evident through her work on grant panels such as the NEA and the Whiting Awards. And for independent authors, Jane has been a steadfast advocate, collaborating with groups like the Alliance of Independent Authors and the Midwest Writers Workshop to empower writers to find success on their own terms. So Janie's here today to share strategies and fresh perspectives that will help you move forward with confidence in your writing and publishing goals. I have no doubt you'll walk away from this session feeling informed, inspired, and ready to take the next steps in your creative path. Please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Jane Friedman. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Oliver. So I do have slides. I'm going to go ahead and bring those up.
Okay.
There we go. Assume you can see those all right.
Looking good.
And here we go. All right. So there are 10 things I wish writers knew about the business. Now, I guess there might possibly be 20 or 30 or even 100, but there's only so much time. So I have prioritized these 10 things. And as some of you know, and Oliver just mentioned, I have a new edition of my book coming out. And these lessons are really drawn from my work on that book and some of the messages that you're going to find in that book. So let's begin. Number one, status anxiety can torpedo your career before it begins. Now, this may not seem like a piece of business advice, but it very much is, because we tend to get distracted by things that give us status or prestige or increase our pecking order. We're thinking about hierarchies. We're looking at how we're competing against other people. And while some of that is healthy, and you're always probably going to be thinking about this because it's built into like the human condition. I advocate for self-awareness about when you're chasing after status and prestige, and making sure that when you're doing it, that it actually aligns with what some of your business goals are. Because one of the things that happens, especially in the writing and publishing community, is that status tends to be inversely correlated with making money. So if you actually want to make money at writing and publishing, chasing status and prestige is very unlikely to help you. So I'll give you an exhibit of this so you have a tangible example of what I mean. Will Self is a literary novelist. You might not know him because he's more well known in the UK. So he's a UK author. And there was an interview with him many years ago. This was in The Guardian. I think it was in maybe 2012. And there was this really impressive quote in the profile of him where he said, "I don't really write for readers. I think that's the defining characteristic of being serious as a writer." And for those of you who, let's say you if you studied in an MFA program, if you are, especially if you're writing short stories, poetry, literary essays, you might be familiar with this attitude. Certainly, I'm familiar with it because I studied creative writing in college, and I was in the university system for 6 or 7 years in these communities. AWP would be another an example of this sort of community if you're familiar with AWP. And there's this feeling that if you focus on the audience or the reader or any of that, you are really not being serious as an artist, as Will Self suggests here, or that marketing and promoting your work or standing up for it, making it known and visible, is somehow dirtying the art, or it's sullying even your reputation as an artist. Because there's this myth, and I don't mean myth in the pejorative sense, but this thing that we don't even recognize it's a myth. There's this myth that if the work is good enough, it's going to get noticed and recognized, rather than good work is actually pushed there through, by all sorts of different forces in the industry that actually have little to do with the merit of the work. Now, the really amusing thing to me, as someone who studies the industry, is that it wasn't more than a couple years later that The Guardian, the same news outlet that profiled Will Self and quoted him saying this, he then became suddenly the poster child of low author incomes. Authors' incomes collapse to abject levels. And, these sorts of articles come along probably every year. Uh, this this assertion that author incomes are declining because of some sort of a survey. I have a lot of problems with those surveys. I'm not going to get into it here, but if you're curious, you can find my comments at my website. Just look for author income surveys and you'll find all of the problems I have with them. But what I found so amusing about this is that, well, it only makes sense to me that if you do not care about readers, or if you're only writing for what you consider serious artistic reasons, that you might not, in fact, earn a living from your writing. So, yeah, isn't that interesting? One of my favorite books that talks about the art and the business and how these two things can coexist. In fact, how these two things can even inform each other comes Make Art, Make Money. One of the most fantastic books on this dynamic. It's really a biography of Jim Henson, masquerading as a kind of a self-help book. So this is by Elizabeth Hyde Stevens, and there's this really great quote in it that I think encapsulates the message of this book, where she says, the romantic image of the artist we have been given coyly ignores the fact that all artists are affected by the market. So you can choose not to engage with it, but you are still going to be affected by it. Years ago, when I worked for the Virginia Quarterly Review, a literary journal, I had someone submit a post about Amy Lowell. You may know her. She's a very well-known poet for the time that she was alive. This was in the 20th century. And what I didn't know about her, but this writer brought forward, was that she was a heavy marketer and promoter of poetry. She was trying to get more readers for something, not just for herself, but for everyone who wrote poetry. And one of her contemporaries was T.S. Eliot. And, here we have, I think, another, like, Will Self and T.S. Eliot, you could probably draw a line connecting the two over time, have very similar views. T.S. Eliot wasn't really a marketer and promoter of his work, but certainly his work was marketed and promoted. Um, and he accused Amy Lowell of being a demon saleswoman of poetry because he did not like how she was trying to build readership for it. This is the sort of attitude that has been carried on over time for many decades. And it is, I think, this is why, and I think some of it ties into these myths we have about art and commerce don't mix. And if you do mix the two, you're of lower status. How dare you uh, try to, darken the art with this sort of commerce? But what we find is that writers who pay attention to dynamics of the market often get their work read. They often go on to write more work because they actually have, the money to do so, and they don't have to be worrying about where their next meal comes from. So, for example, Mark Twain, one of his books, in its Innocents Abroad, was published by subscription. So that means that traveling salesmen went door to door peddling it to consumers. And that wasn't the thing you were supposed to do at the time. At the time, the proper way to sell your book was in a bookstore, not to go door to door demanding people buy it. uh, but this was his best-selling book, and he made profits on this that were many multiples of what he would have made on bookstore sales. And you can find all sorts of equivalents today of how authors do this, and they kind of go outside the norms or the standards because it's actually going to be more beneficial for their business, even if it's not considered, prestigious to do so. You might think about Brandon Sanderson using a Kickstarter, through which he earned $41 million to support his books. And then he sold off rights to a publisher. But still, even though I would argue the stigma of self-publishing has faded, there's still this overarching belief that, real authors have real publishers and those publishers publish those books to best effect. But I hope we can agree that's not necessarily the case. And I think it's even not the case today at all. Authors have become quite savvy and capable of doing a better job than the publishers. Okay, so moving on to number two, which builds on the status anxiety bit. I find that talent is often inversely correlated with business success. So, a lot of writers, especially early in their careers, will be very focused on whether or not they have what it takes to be a successful writer. They think it all depends on talent, or, there's insecurity. Am I going to be wasting my time? How will I know? You're waiting for some sort of external validation. And then when it doesn't come, that can really stop you in your tracks before you've had a chance to see if you have what it takes. And it takes a very long time, and we're going to talk about this a little later. So, what I find is that the people who feel like they have talent, the people who've been told that they have talent early in the process, they expect results to come more quickly than they actually do, or tend to arrive. And when that success doesn't come, they feel like the market doesn't care about talent. The market only cares about the bad stuff. And there's this bitterness that sets in. And I think it really stalls progress and it causes people to drop out. What I hope writers can understand, although it's really hard to let this sink in a way that actually informs your actions. Stephen King said in his great book on writing, talent is cheaper than table salt. And so I think if you find any writer with the success of someone like Stephen King, they have probably said some version of this. That yes, there are so many talented people out there in every field, but it actually does not necessarily mean that person is going to be the one that succeeds at this, as far as like what we might consider success to be in today's market, like visibility, readership, being able to continue doing this thing that you enjoy doing. Ta-Nehisi Coates some years ago did an interview where he talked about his trajectory. He started out writing for free for The Atlantic, and he had even a lot of trouble getting The Atlantic to publish his stuff for free. He said, I had a style and voice that had never seemed to fit anywhere. I could not convince editors that what I was curious about was worth writing about. And then he says a little bit later in that interview, the path is so tough and you get beat up so much that people eventually go to business school and become lawyers. If you find yourself continuing, you will have a skill set and the competition will thin out. So I don't want to say that this all boils down to resilience or grit, because it doesn't. But I do think one of the major reasons people fail to continue and succeed is they're expecting results on some sort of a timeline that is either unrealistic or they could just be perpetually unlucky. But figuring out how you can continue in spite of the barriers and the frustrations is really key. Partner, but do not depend on publishers and agents. So this is something I hit pretty hard on in the book, and always have, even before I had a book out, because publishers and agents have one big flaw, at least from a universal perspective of authors. They all have one big flaw. They are self-interested. But you too are self-interested. It's human. We're all going to put our self-interest first. And so, yes, they want to partner. They want to discover new talent. They want to support their authors. They want to partner with you. They're interested in art. But at the end of the day, they have concerns that are really quite different from your concerns. And especially if you're looking at the big five publishers, which I have those up on the screen here on the left-hand side. Those are the big New York houses that publish a good chunk of what you're going to see in your average bookstore. All of those publishers are owned by global conglomerates. Most of them are not even owned by US companies. They're owned by companies in Germany or Australia or France. And I have those corporate owners listed on the right. Those companies have all sorts of priorities that have zero to do, actually, even sometimes with book publishing. They have shareholders. They have, uh, they have the profits that they have to maintain. And so they're making all sorts of decisions based on criteria that are frankly irrelevant to you. And that's why I say you want to partner and use these companies for what they're good at or to what they might bring to the table, but they're ultimately, they can't be counted on for your business success. It's great when it happens, but you can't depend on it, at least not over the length of an entire career. There are a few lucky people, but they're the exception. Now, that may sound slightly depressing for some, but here's the really good news. If you look at the top selling novelists in recent years, and I would include probably 2023 in this as well, you will find that some of the best selling authors are self publishing. They started off self publishing and they continue to self publish. So, Frida McFadden, Anna Huang, these are authors that now have partnerships, and I use partnership in the true sense of that word because they're keeping some of their rights. They're partnering with Source Books, both of them. Their Source Books runs a very particular imprint called Bloom Books that specializes in these partnerships, and that model is actually spreading throughout the company in interesting ways that I've written about if you read my newsletters. I'm not saying this is the future, but I think it really points to how authors and publishers are starting to collaborate in ways that I think are more beneficial for both sides. And I think authors actually have more leverage and power than they have in the past, especially when it comes to commercial fiction, as we're seeing here. And now that I've mentioned commercial fiction, uh, another term for that would be mass market fiction. And even the leaders of these big five New York publishers have acknowledged how much the landscape has changed. So Jonathan Karp of Simon & Schuster, one of the big five, just said within the last year, I think that self-published authors are a fertile opportunity for Simon & Schuster in the same way that mass market publishing used to be. Mass market publishing has given way, I think, to independent publishing. By that he means self-publishing. And we want to be a part of that. And of course, they've picked up any number of authors who have been successful in self-publishing. Now, I want to be clear here. I am not advocating you go out and self-publish your next book in the hopes that a traditional publisher will pick it up. I'm not saying this is a rare occurrence. It's not a rare occurrence, but it occurs for people who are able to succeed and attract the attention of a publisher or an agent. In other words, if you self-publish and then go query these publishers and agents saying, look, I self-published. Do you want to get in on this? Their most likely answer is going to be no. Or show us your sales numbers and why there's money for us to make here. That's easy. So that said, if you look at certain segments of the market, especially romance, especially anything where people are avidly reading those books in Kindle Unlimited or in ebook form, you're definitely going to find how the scales have tipped in favor of people building their careers through self-publishing. The former CEO of Penguin Random House, Madeline McIntosh, she left a couple years ago, roughly, and has started a new publishing company called Authors Equity. Notice the name. She said when that company was launched, publishers work harder than ever to impact sales. We've invested and innovated, but despite these efforts, we've lost the power to uniquely influence the consumer or the reader. In the old market, degrees of success came down to what the publisher did or didn't do. In the new market, it's about the author, and she calls Authors Equity the author-centered publisher. Now, their business model is not quite like the business model I just discussed with Source Books or Bloom Books, like what they're doing. Authors Equity is yet even more different from that. They don't, as far as I understand it, they don't pay advances, but the authors are earning higher royalties, and there is a collaborative relationship, much more collaborative than you would find with your average traditional publisher. The other unique thing about authors' equity is that authors are investors. So there's, I think her last, Louise Penny, a novelist, is one of the investors. Tim Ferriss, James Clear. They have all put money into this venture because they see the need for not this is interesting. I think that they see that they don't necessarily want to self-publish and do it all by themselves. They see the power of having a company that has mastered some aspects of this system, especially physical retail distribution, and they want to bring the talents or the strengths of both sides together to create something better than either side could do by themselves. So partner. What partners serve your career goals? I think this is a really fundamental question for every writer to ask themselves. And it's why I do the publishing paths chart. If you're not aware of it, it's on my site. It's the first link under topics, the key book publishing paths chart, where I talk about the different types of book publishing partners as well as self-publishing options and thinking through which company or which business model is really going to help me accomplish the goals that I have set out for this particular project. And your answer might change with each and every project or as your career grows or pivots. Understand the market, but you don't have to follow it. So a lot of my work involves helping authors understand what's happening in the industry, the trends in the marketplace, helping them see where the opportunities are and where there are some challenges. It's not that I think you need to follow the trends or write to the trends, but I think it really helps to know which way the wind is blowing on the way to your destination. So you know which way to adjust the sails, or if you're going to have to start rowing, or if it's going to take a few months or years longer than you expected. These sorts of issues. I think it helps reduce frustration and adjust your expectations when you understand the market, where the market might be headed, and what the market is responding to. So for an example that's outside of book publishing, but I think is it's complementary to book publishing, is what's happening at newspapers. And I could also show you a similar graph that shows you magazines, print magazines. So employment at newspapers and the number of newspapers generally, it's declining. And what's replacing it is a different type of operation, a digital publisher, Substacks, YouTube channels, TikTok, etc. So, if you're someone who really wants to have a career in the newspaper industry, well, you really have to pivot and think about, am I going to try and, hang on to the traditional model in today's market and be the exception? Or am I going to change direction and look at what are the new entities that are replacing what the job that the newspaper used to do? Earlier this year, I offered a free class on how literary talent gets discovered, because I think this is also part of, understanding the market, understanding trends, understanding how people break out, how they get visible. And I find that there is so much bad advice surrounding this. Or there are a lot of myths. I'll use that word again. There are a lot of myths around this, how this happens. There's some people who think you have to know someone. Others think that you have to have a big online following. They're all, it doesn't help that the media tends to focus on like the most depressing examples of who got book deals. They'll kind of cherry pick the celebrities and TikTok influencers who got book deals and then conclude that no one else is getting a book deal. It's just these people. That's not true. So one of the reasons I did this free class earlier this year, the recording's on YouTube if you want to go look for it. I looked at debut novelist deals for a period over 2024. counted them all up and then studied the author. I was trying to figure out what seems to have been the biggest factor that led to their book deal. Did they have connections? Were they publishing in journals or magazines? Were they self-publishing? Did they already work in the publishing industry? Were they in the entertainment industry, et cetera, et cetera? And so these are the results that I came up with. I was not surprised by the results, but other people were, and in fact, tried to spin this as negative, but I don't think it's negative at all. This literary university community is the biggest segment, and that makes perfect sense to me. These are people who have spent time in writing programs. They have MFA degrees. They teach writing. Um, they're publishing in literary journals. And for a lot of writers, this is how careers begin, and this is how they begin to get known. They're not writing in a vacuum, disconnected with every single other person in the industry. They are probably starting to place poems, essays, stories in literary outlets, and that includes this 37.8% here. People who have been doing some work and showing their work in that space. The others are fairly predictable to me. People who are already writing professionally, they're storytelling professionally, they're somehow already engaged with a readership or with an audience. That includes the journalists, media, TV, film, stage, entertainment, publishing industry types, online creators or influencers. But notice the Black online creator or influencer piece. It's pretty slim. It was so slim, I couldn't fit the number in there. I think it's like maybe 1%. So the TikTok influencers are not stealing away all the book deals. Yes, they are getting book deals, but it's not in the quantity that everyone seems to think. The no obvious connections piece, this is people who, when I looked for them online, I couldn't find them. So I couldn't like dredge up what connections they might have had. Or if they did have a website or an Instagram or something, I couldn't see any obvious reason to say, oh yeah, I know exactly why that person got a book deal. There was no clear connection. And a few of them, I actually messaged them and I said, how did you get your book deal? Would you tell me? Did you cold query? How did you do it? And yes, it was the people who responded to me. They said, I sent a query to an agent and the agent sold the book. It still happens. All right. So the last thing I want to say on this part about understanding the market is understand the people in the market as human beings. That's who you're dealing with. Not I know I've talked about how publishers and agents are very self-interested. There's corporate priorities. But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with other human beings and their biases and their emotions. And I think this is really well captured in Hamilton Nolan's article where he had a book published and wrote an essay about the experience of having the book published. And so he talks about some of these ideas he had about the industry before he experienced it firsthand. And he says, as a young man, I regarded the book publishing industry as an unapproachable bastion of erudite literary sophisticates. I was relieved of this notion during the years that I wrote for a popular blog and regularly received solicitations from agents and editors encouraging me to turn my latest viral blog post into a book. Though flattered, I was always struck with skepticism at their enthusiasm. Really, I would wonder. You think that 10 best breakfast sandwich breads ranked could be a good book? This is how I learned that many people in the publishing industry spend their days browsing the internet in boredom, like every other office worker. Their daily consumption of listicles and celebrity gossip is what qualifies them as more literate than the average American. So I think it helps greatly to take folks inside publishing off their pedestal a little bit and just look at how they behave, look at their actions. Don't take it all too seriously. Understand, the environment that you're in, and then decide when it's time to move on. And I don't mean if it's time to move on, I don't mean leave writing and publishing. I mean, for certain projects, the timing might be bad. People are just going to be set against it for weird reasons that are out of your control. I think it's really important when the trends or the environment is working against you strongly and you're hitting your head against the wall look for something else to do. It saddens me greatly when I go back. There's a conference I go to almost every year. So I've been going to it for more than 2 decades. And there are some folks who come back to that conference even after 20 years selling the same book. It's been 20 years and you have to move on. If someone didn't want it then and they haven't wanted it in the interim and they don't want it now, I think maybe you're not growing anymore at that point and you need to investigate some other things that you want to do because a writing career is, in my experience, not built on one book. Harper Lee accepted. I guess she might be the only exception. Uh, you'll be writing many things, so don't fear that the well will go dry. Let's talk about book sales. If any of you have followed me for 2 minutes, you've probably heard me say that you're probably not going to make a living on book sales. They're not alone enough to make a living, especially if it's just your first book. You might get a very nice advance. It might last you for a little while, but a lot of advances do not earn out, meaning you don't get any further money. You don't get any royalties. And so that means you have to sell another book to keep that income going. On average, remember, this is an average. 98% of books don't sell more than 5,000 copies. So people, especially the general public, tends to think books sell more than they actually do. And it sometimes takes writers a long time to realize just how few books get sold on a title by title basis. And many people aren't authors, they're not forthright about how little their books sell because they feel embarrassed or ashamed. And, people don't realize that it's actually a great success to sell 5,000 copies in some categories. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing better, but that is not the case. So writers, if they want to make a living at this, or if they need money for it to be sustainable, you have to think about building a business model that goes beyond book sales. And my book hits on this really hard. And it looks at all sorts of different types of income streams from donations to affiliate marketing, advertising, recurring donations such as Patreon systems, crowdfunding, grants, services. This would be like freelancing, freelance editing, teaching or online teaching, and then kind of the holy grail, I think, for so many people, subscription content. So this would be like if you had a Substack that people were paying to receive. I think it's great if you can do that. It is the hardest thing on this chart, just FYI. The areas in green are the easier places where I suggest people start. So this is actually organized from easier to harder. The other thing to consider is how every writer has some sort of a demand curve. And earlier in your career, you might not have much demand for your work, and you have to be patient enough to have that demand build, and then you start to fill all sorts of different points on the demand curve for your work. I recently did a free class with poet Ariana Brown talking a lot about this idea if you want to delve into it further. And I used a chart just like this to kind of demonstrate her demand curve specifically. But for most writers, when you start out, even if you don't have a book published, there's some sort of light demand for what you're doing in public for free, like social media posts, free newsletter. And then as you get up into the curve, the number of people decreases, but you start earning money. So there's a certain number of people who will purchase the book, and then a certain number of people who will buy a ticket to an event or buy that membership or subscription or come to a speaking engagement. This particular session today has all sorts of people who are willing to join for free, but it's only going to be a small percentage of you who don't buy my book, and that's okay. Um, that's how the business works. So as you increase your chances of earning a living from this by having many different options for people to choose from and meeting people where they are in terms of what they have to spend, their budget, and the level of commitment that they bring to the table. Another way to think about this and to brainstorm ideas for what's on this demand curve is to think about how you've got this story or content or advice or service, however you want to think about it. You've got this thing that you want out in the world, and it can take many different shapes and forms. It can be repurposed and re-envisioned in many different ways. So I wrote a book on the business of being a writer. Now I'm teaching you some of the fundamentals in this free webinar. You could come to my workshop in Maryland next month, where we spend 6 hours together, in a hands-on interactive environment, etc. So there are lots of different ways to deliver your knowledge to the world. I advise authors not to get too wrapped up just in the book form, because it's actually not the most profitable form for a lot of people. Just look at and I would even put like Brandon Sanderson in here, even though he definitely makes his living on book sales, don't get me wrong. But think about how we did this crowdfunding campaign for $42 million almost, that involved not just delivering books to people, but delivering as kind of a package of things that were very exciting for his fans, that involved exclusivity, that involved special editions. It's not just the book at that point. It's this feeling of having something special from him that's beyond reading just an ebook edition. So now that I've touched on Brandon Sanderson, I actually spoiled what was coming next. Prolific authors have a much easier time making a living off sales alone. This is why we have the 20 books to 50K phenomenon. For those who aren't familiar with this idea, it comes from the self-publishing community, where they hypothesize that if you write and publish 20 books, that equates to a modest living of $50,000 a year, because once you've got 20 books, you now have a backlist that's consistently selling and feeding into sales of new releases. And it creates this flywheel, that's a full-time living from writing. So, as I said, Brandon Sanderson is one example. He is prolific. He writes so much. He writes so much. He had these 4 extra books to crowdfund around that his publisher had not contracted him for. I wish I could write 4 extra books in my spare time. It's not going to happen. It's nice if you can do it, though. And I think even though this tends to apply more to the commercial novelists or genre fiction people, you can even see this at work in the literary community. I mean, just take one look at Joyce Carol Oates. This doesn't even capture, like, I don't know, a tenth of her output. Like, she publishes a lot. And I mean, I don't know what her book sales are, but I'm sure she can make a living on her book sales alone. But I think the message here is it's rarely, your living rarely comes from one book. It comes from a lot of different books if it's solely from book sales. Let's talk about platform. So I do think platform is important, but not because agents and publishers think it's important. This is a mindset issue that I try to grapple with in my book and in my talks everywhere that I go, because I feel like platform has become the boogeyman, that authors are afraid of, like they're getting hit with a rejection that's based on you don't have a big enough platform. Now, that can happen, especially on the nonfiction side. I don't think it's really prevalent in fiction, at least not today. I want you to try and forget about those anxieties or burdens that publishers or agents might be placing on you related to platform, and think about instead the early career challenge that you have, which is creating demand, as I discussed, building out that demand curve and building visibility for yourself and your work. I went through this myself. This is like what I sometimes call the trough of despair, because you don't know if you're going to get out of the trough. It's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of self-doubt. How am I going to get people to pay any attention to this, that show that I have substance or that what I have fits their needs, etc. And, my trough was, from roughly 2010 to 2012, actually a little bit longer than that. So everyone's going to answer this differently. Some people answer it through online visibility, through social media, but I don't want you to boil it down to that. I think that's where it starts to get to be this The thing that everyone hates, the burden that's presented to you that you do not want to undertake. There are lots of ways this can happen. I think some people do it by being in the right scene. There are people who actually move to New York and spend time in the literary scene in New York as a way to build those relationships and get opportunities. Not everyone can do that, but if you can, excellent. Some people do it through MFA programs, others do it through prolific submissions to literary magazines. It happens in so many ways. So the reason I think you should care about platform is because when it comes time to bring attention to anything you do, but especially a book, if you don't have that platform, this is approximately what it feels like. Sitting by yourself in the cold, and there is no one. Like all you hear is the echo of your voice. And it's really sad if this happens. And I've seen it happen with multiple authors. And it also results in desperation. It results in bad social media posting, like buy my book sort of posting. It leads to bitterness that your publisher, if one has been involved, isn't supporting you sufficiently. It just spins out into so many negative consequences. So, again, to emphasize that this isn't just about social media, it's about lived platform. That's a term I've taken from a colleague, Allison K. Williams. I love this term because it gets our focus off of TikToks of the world and onto things that are relevant to you and likely have really significant meaning for you. So, for example, I've already talked about how prolific authors essentially have an advantage in the business. If you are publishing frequently, if your work is getting visible in more places over time, this gives you a platform, and it can be any sort of outlet, as long as it's, I hope, an outlet that matches your goals and what you want to be known for. There's also community relationships, things that you're involved with related to writing and publishing, but also things you're involved in that relate to the themes in your work, issues that are important to you that may tie into what you write and publish. And then we've got your personal relationships, the people you meet at conferences or in online groups, relationships you might have with the media over time, with mentors, teachers, etc. All of these things play a really vital role in helping you market and promote and giving you visibility. And it's something that grows and evolves over time. It's not an overnight process. I think business requires the same imagination and creativity as the writing, rather than business being this yucky thing that is just about the numbers and the spreadsheets. I think it gets unfairly characterized as that. The people who are, the bean counters, that's to me, that's not business. Um, that's just the numbers. And I've never run my business based on the numbers alone. It can inform my decisions, but it's not driving the decisions. And any business that's simply driven by the numbers is not going to succeed. Dana Gioia has always been inspiring to me because he brings together the art in the business in his career and in his the work that you see. He became chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts many years ago, and people interviewed him at the time very curious about his background because he was an executive at Kraft Foods. He had an MBA, but he also had an MFA in poetry and actively published poetry. And because there is such a art versus business dichotomy, especially in literary communities, people had trouble processing how someone could both be a business executive and a poet, like a serious poet. And he said, well, once you get into middle and upper management, the decisions that you make are largely qualitative and creative. So I want you to remember that about your own career. The decisions that you're making are creative ones. It's about thinking about who is the best partner for me, who is going to help me with my creative ambitions, who's going to help me reach the readers, what is the best method or path for me to engage with them over time that's going to suit me and that they're going to be delighted by. These are questions of imagination. They are not business questions in my book. This leads me to knowing why you do what you do is a business advantage because so many people don't have a clue why they're doing what they're doing. They're copying off someone else's notes. They're doing it because they see it demonstrated in the market and they think this must be the way to do it. Um, they don't have enough experience. There are lots of reasons that lead people to do things and they don't have a good reason for it. I would say that to give yourself a kick in the pants, if should you need it, I would go watch this really infamous TED Talk called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It's a book too. It's a book by the same title. The TED Talk came first. And you only have to watch like the first 5 to 10 minutes where he talks about the difference between companies that operate with why at the middle versus something else. And he uses Apple as an example. I think Apple was a good example at the time. I start to question if it's still the right example today. But I think even if you even if you couldn't put into words how a company was behaving with why, you would know in your gut that they were operating with a why because you feel better when you interact with them. It just feels like their behaviors and their actions are in alignment, and you feel more strongly and more confidently when you deal with them. So watch the video and you'll understand exactly what I mean by that. All right, so the last point, and then we'll go to Q&A. There is no formula for success except for this. And can't take credit for this. This is from a guy who writes a really interesting site called Wait But Why, Tim Urban. He said last year, I met many aspiring artists in my early 20s. Observing their trajectories since then, I've learned that long shot careers in the arts are long shots not because success relies on wild luck or rare genius or insane connections. Success stories pretty reliably happen for people who combine three not that remarkable things: solid talent, savvy business sense, 15 to 20 years of persistent hard work. It's just that most people only pull off one or two of those things and not all three. I really love this. I think it is exactly my experience. The only niggling bit is there's a really loaded word in there. Hard work, persistent hard work. What is that? There is so much hiding underneath that word. I think everyone reads it a little bit differently. So I want to tell you how I read this word. What is hard work? It's writing a lot of things that don't get published. It's getting rejected continuously. It's not knowing if you have what it takes or talent. It's flailing about on social media. It's attending conferences or events and feeling awkward about it. It's feeling status anxiety and still continuing on. Finding trusted mentors or critique partners, which I do not think is easy. I think this is really incredibly challenging. Revising in ways that lead to progress, also very challenging. Recognizing your strengths and then building on them. Recognizing your weaknesses and then letting them go. Making a ton of mistakes. And most importantly, showing up and doing this work despite all of the ridiculous things that are going to happen to you. And I could keep going for, countless slides. I don't think it's probably acknowledged enough that a lot of the work that gets done here is not all that pleasant. And that's why it's called hard work. So it's the ability to keep going even when the signals aren't particularly favorable to you. Now, going back to the quote that I mentioned, he mentioned that business savvy. And that's where I try to help people. I do not want your lack of business savvy to be the reason that you don't get to where you want to be. I I might be able to tell you if you have talent, maybe. I might be able to spot that, but I don't think that's the distinguishing factor. Talent is like table salt. I think hard work is more or less within everyone's control. especially if you can find the small moments every day to put in that work, just whatever your circumstances. But I don't know who's going to keep it up. That's the really big factor for me. I don't know who's going to continue despite all of the frustrating things that happen. But I hope that you don't get stopped because you don't know the business. So, to that end, if you want more education on the business, check out the second edition of my book. It just came out last week, The Business of Being a Writer. Or you can subscribe to either of my newsletters. There's a free newsletter, Electric Speed. It's not really industry focused, but it has a lot of industry tools and some of my commentary. And then I do have a more industry focused newsletter called The Bottom Line. There's a free version and a paid version. You can sign up at my website. All right, I'm going to stop the share and then we can do some
Perfect. Yeah.
Q&A.
Get some Q&A in here. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Jane. That was incredible. I have lots of thoughts, and it looks like everyone else does too. So let's jump into that Q&A, see if we can answer some questions here. I see Andrea's asking, generally speaking, what is the difference or expansion of the updated version of your 2018 publication of The Business Being a Writer versus now? So what big changes did you make? I guess you could say.
Yeah. So I'll answer that question, but I also want to put a link into the chat because I actually have a page that talks about it that people might want to check out.
Perfect.
Um, there it is. But I'll just summarize briefly. So there's a section devoted to platform building that wasn't in the previous edition. It includes some of the old information, but it's revised and expanded with my kind of like with how my thinking has evolved on the issue. There's a new section about business basics that are like general business basics, like business entities, taxes, legal issues, that sort of thing. That was not really in the first edition in a meaningful way. And I have some expanded information on self-publishing and book marketing and promotion. I would say those are the biggest additions. I took out some information on magazine and online publishing because that area is very volatile and I feel like the book would have gone out of date as soon as I had written it or published it. And there's also an exercise now with every chapter, which was a big request from instructors who use the book in classrooms.
Perfect. Let's see here. Okay, so Louise is asking, is there any advice for those of us who really don't want to or can spend much energy on self-promotion? Any thoughts on that?
Focus on relationships because it's the people who know you and want to support you who actually have the most important role to play when it comes to promotion. Frankly, I don't think hardcore self promotion works. If I had come onto this class and just talked about myself for 60 minutes, I don't think anyone's going to buy my book. But there are some people, but that's like the equivalent of someone going on social media and just talking about themselves in their book. Or it's the equivalent of going to a cocktail party, and if someone asks you a question, all you can do is talk about your book and why they should buy it. No one cares. But they can care what you can do for them. So I would try to change the mindset into one of service. How can you talk about other people in the community that you enjoy, admire, appreciate, read, review other works if you can that relate to your own, pay attention to comparable authors or organizations, lift them up. This is a concept called literary citizenship, which is explored in the book. So instead of self-promotion, focus on literary citizenship. And I guess my belief is that we all want to show appreciation for what has changed our lives or for the beauty that we see in the community or for excellence in the community. So focus on that.
I like that. It's a lot about bringing value, not just like say, here I am, look at me, look what I'm doing. It doesn't work in person either, just saying. Nobody wants to hear us talking all about ourselves all the time. Or even what we're particularly interested in. Okay, let's see what we got here. Let's scroll down. Okay, can you speak to the steps of how to transition from self-publishing to partnering? I guess I'm partnering with publishers or other entities.
So, as I alluded to, for the key examples that I showed today, those are cases where the publisher sees your success and they're getting in touch with you saying, gosh, we see what's happening here. You're making waves. And so you're attracting people who want to get in on the action and try and fill in the gaps for you. There was this really, I'll just a quick anecdote. I had a really interesting experience at Joseph Beth last week because I was doing pre-order signed copies in the store. And I was talking to the bookseller about how recently they had a group signing by a bunch of Bloom Books authors. So that's the imprint I was talking about that partners with self-publishing folks. And he said, there's this really interesting period of time when they're self-published, Source Books or Bloom Books is now going to come out with those books in print in like new editions. Um, but we can't and people come in knowing about those new editions, but we can't sell them the old one. We can only sell them the new one. And and it's like, okay, maybe technically they could sell them the old self-published edition, um, but it's a barrier for a lot of self-published authors when dealing with independent bookstores. They do not want to order from the places that they typically just that self-published authors typically distribute through, like this would be Ingram Spark or maybe just Amazon only. The terms aren't as favorable for them, or it's not worth it to them. Maybe but there are lots of reasons. It depends on the book.
Right.
So this goes back to the reason for partnering with the traditional publisher. But the point I want to make is that I think self-publishing authors can do so well through ebook sales and through online sales. And so the publishers are paying attention to that. And if you can do well there, they will probably want to come in and then fill in that gap with the print distribution and retail and subsidiary rights, so translation and so on. Sometimes you're going to get approached by an agent first, who they're also keeping tabs and kind of looking for talent. They're looking at the Amazon bestseller lists. Um, they're looking at TikTok. In fact, the biggest industry outlet for tracking book sales, BookScan, they have their own curated book talk author list, and it includes self-published authors.
That's cool.
So if you're doing well, the opportunities will come. But it's not that I suggest against querying and trying to make that partnership work on your own. Maybe you could, but I would probably think about looking for an agent first rather than going to the publishers, because the agent is likely going to have more market information about who would be a good partner for you.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. No, sorry, I'm just sifting through these questions. Just finding a good one. So Greg is asking, is there a good place to roll out a book in chapters and build a community? And I know I'm on Substack. I know you're on Substack. So I'm curious your thoughts on that one.
If it's a novel, then the place to do it as of today is Wattpad. So for those who don't know what Wattpad is, it's primarily read in app, like you read stories on your phone through the Wattpad app, but there is a website as well. And authors typically publish serializations through Wattpad. It's not usually finished books being posted chapter by chapter, scene by scene. Usually the writers, it's like works in progress and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going. Authors get discovered through that too. So there's kind of a similar dynamic where Wattpad itself is monitoring who is doing well, and they actually tip off publishers, hey, you may want to take a look at so and so. Or even with TV and film productions, they fish around in Wattpad looking for stories, looking for talent. There are other places like Wattpad, but I think Wattpad would be most relevant to today's group. There's Radish, Tapas, Webtoon. Um, yeah, you could do the fiction on Substack. There's a specific community called Fictionistas that I think focuses maybe on fiction serialization that includes a Substack emphasis. But I have to be honest, even though there are people doing fiction on Substack, I don't think it's a great path to be on because I don't think readers go to Substack to read fiction for the most part. They go to Wattpad though, in huge numbers, like 100 million people. There used to be Kindle Vella as well for this activity, but they closed up shop.
Right.
If you're nonfiction, I think Substack is more viable, but I would really not think of it as publishing chapter by chapter. I would think about it as publishing small thought pieces and jumping off points that build an audience. And then at some point down the road, yeah, that I could definitely see a book coming out of that. But I just want to really warn against trying to reverse engineer. Sometimes I think people are trying to reverse engineer the process of getting an agent or a publisher by putting the work, in these places just for that reason. And I think it's much more likely to happen of itself organically because you're so enthusiastic or you can't help yourself. You just have to get these ideas out in the world.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's scroll down here. I have this is kind of a different topic. I have Yolanchi's. It's more of a statement of the question, but she said she'd like to know more about grants for writers, or like how maybe how to write them, or like
Mhm.
you know the general idea of what they are and how they work.
Sure, this is a bit of a difficult time to get grants.
Yeah.
So what I'm referring to is generally state or federal grants. But there are private foundations as well that do grant work. But like the National Endowment for the Arts is the one that everyone knows, and they actually give grants to specific writers to work on their projects, and they're pretty significant grants. What I would say is look first to your city, your county, your region, and your state because it's gonna be less competitive, a smaller pool of applicants, and you're more likely to get some small successes, which will then make it more likely that you'll be competitive if you start going for more national types of grants, like from the Whiting Awards or Guggenheim. Like there's so many of these types of awards. You generally have to have some work published, or people have to be able to see evidence of some success before they're going to give you a grant. Fun fact, it was just last month that James Patterson started a beta grant program for writers to finish their manuscript. And when the Authors Guild announced this, because he partnered with authors organizations to do the application process, when the Authors Guild opened up to applications, they had to close in one day because they hit the limit of applications. So I hope he does more of that. I think because of the political situation right now, I think writers and others are going to be hoping for more private sources of grants, like the James Patterson grant. If you want to stay up to date on these sorts of opportunities, I would take a look at Funds for Writers, which is a newsletter by Hope Clark. It's a free newsletter. There is a paid edition, but you can probably get by on the free one. And there's also a paid subscription service called Literistic. I can't remember if they cover grants too, but it's worth checking out regardless, whether they have grants or not, because it just lists opportunities for writers.
Excellent. Okay. So we'll probably just answer a couple more. I think we'll end here at about 15 minutes after. I have an interesting question here from Heather. She's wondering if you have any thoughts for writers who are getting started later in life, where it feels difficult to imagine, 20 years to build both craft and relationships for an audience. How do you factor this concern into goal setting? Any thoughts?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So there's going to be a certain amount of prioritization. that takes place, where someone who's earlier in their career may spend a lot more time exploring different genres or categories, exploring different types of events, um, having a lot more like what I would call wandering or meandering. Usually, when we start writing later in life, there's more clarity around what we want to do and what we want to accomplish. We've been thinking about maybe some of these things for a while, and we know, like, okay, I've got this memoir I absolutely have to write, or I have these certain personal essays that I really want to get out into the world, and you just focus wholeheartedly on finishing them. But I have seen so many people like this who do phenomenal work connecting with other people at the same time. Because as soon as you start working on a piece of writing, you find that you want to be with other people who are facing similar challenges, or you take writing classes and you get connected with critique partners or with mentors, and that starts to build on itself, and you start becoming part of a bigger group that is very much part of your platform. So, don't self-limit yourself or think that you might not have time to do everything that's required. I mean, you may have limited time, generally speaking, but I think sometimes people they're looking a little bit too far out into the future and making and cutting off some opportunities because they think there won't be enough time. But I do think if you are shorter on time, I think it benefits you to focus on doing the writing work first and having the relationships grow out of improving the writing.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, I got one more question from Tristan. And he's asking if we can't rely on writing books or novels and book sales alone to become, he says, ultra rich. Where would you suggest we put a little more energy into our writing? And he suggests like Substack, for example. I think of that list of you showed us,
Yes,
subscription based being on the bottom, that one being a little bit more
it
difficult. Like,
is.
yeah,
It's quite
where
difficult.
should we start there? Yeah.
Some of this is going to be dependent on what you're writing, but I think Patreon or just simple donation methods are so easy to execute and don't require much commitment from you. Um, you do have to go to people you know first, and you have to be comfortable asking. What I see some folks doing is doing a crowdfunding campaign, so like a Kickstarter or similar, to help if they're self-publishing to fund that first book. Um, if they're traditionally publishing, you might have a Patreon for people who are fans of your work or who want to support your work, and they're pledging a few bucks a month. And you have to think then about what's some sort of exclusive something that I can give them. I'm not saying it has to be writing work. That isn't even necessarily the best idea because it means that people have to have time to read it, and you don't want to like burden people with things that they don't necessarily want. They may just want to support you. And so you might have like exclusive swag or special Zooms, or you send them a postcard. Who knows? It's going to depend on who you are in your writing. But that's a really simple way to start. If you do like the idea of newsletters or Substack, I think the subscription model is really tough if it's built on a transaction spirit. So by that, I mean, people are paying for this very particular value or service that you're providing through the newsletter. So like a magazine subscription, you're only going to subscribe to that magazine for as long as it gives you something that you enjoy or that brings value to your life. Same is true of a Substack newsletter. So instead of transactional, think about, can I turn this into more of a patron-oriented model like Patreon? And I'm not going to require people to pay, but they can pledge or give at some level. And again, they get some little special thing that the non-paying people do not get. There's one Substack. It's by John Warner. It's about I'm not going to remember the name, but it's about books. It's a book Substack. He's a book critic for the Chicago Tribune, and I'm a free subscriber. I've never felt driven to pay at this point because his pay, if you pay him, it's really, you get the nice, fuzzy, warm feeling of being a supporter. The one thing he does for his supporters is he gives you a curated or recommended reading list based on your likes or dislikes. That's the thing he gives. It's not extra content because all of it's free to everybody. So that's the model I would encourage if you're interested in Substack.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jane. That this has been an incredible session. I've learned a lot. I think can see everyone has learned so much. Wish we had time to answer all these questions. There's literally so
Yeah.
many here, but we just don't. Well, let me go ahead and just grab my last little closer. I just want to, as we wrap up this presentation, I want to remind everyone we will have a replay available. I saw someone was asking if I could re-see the slides and things like that. Don't worry, we'll get those the replay sent out to you guys here shortly and get that available. I just want to give my heartfelt thank you to you, Jane, for coming and sharing your expertise with us and your invaluable insights. It's just been an incredible session. Um, I'll see you all on Friday for our last webinar of the week for our April webinar series. If you want to check that out, you can find it at our Literature and Latte website there. But thank you so much for coming. I just want to say, everyone, keep on writing, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.